Over the years, Batman and horror have become synonymous with each other. This is one of the many reasons why I love Batman comics. I love horror. I love feeling uneasy and going outside of my comfort zone. Comics like A Serious House on Serious Earth, The Cult, and Red Rain are some of my favorites for that very reason. From cruel and sadistic serial killers to monstrous creatures that lurk in the sewers, these comics have had their fair share of very dark and disturbing moments. However, even when you think about some of the darkest Batman comics and storylines, the horror is usually contained within the mythos of the comic itself. The creatures or villains of these stories couldn't, for the most part, actually exist. The horror ends when you close the comic. There are outliers, of course, but they're usually few and far between. The comic we're going to be talking about today is an exception. The horror in Batman Night Cries is very real. Batman Night Cries was a one-off graphic novel released in 1992, written by Archie Goodwin and illustrated by Scott Hampton. Night Cries covers a subject matter that not many writers are willing to tackle: child abuse, a very real evil. Night Cries follows Batman and the newly appointed Commissioner Gordon as the pair try to track down a new serial killer that has shaken Gotham to its core. But when a child witness claims Batman is the one committing the murders, the Dark Knight must piece together this broken puzzle to clear his name. If you're looking for a comic that'll give you a nice escape from the horrors of the real world, well, this is not it. This graphic novel is considered to be one of the darkest and most disturbing Batman comics of all time. It definitely is disturbing, but it doesn't rely on shock value to scare you, and it never feels exploitative. It doesn't just use child abuse as a scare tactic. In fact, I think it actually handles the subject matter respectfully and thoughtfully. Night Cries is less of a traditional Batman comic and more of a hard look into the secret atrocities that can happen within a family. We see the different ways victims of abuse handle their trauma, because abuse isn't a one-direction thing. There isn't just one way to cope with. We also look into the cycle of violence, or how abuse can carry from one person to the other. It asks the question of how this chain can be broken. It also talks about fear and how fear can be used to manipulate and control the weak and ignorant. There are a lot of moving parts here, and honestly, Night Cries handles all of them beautifully. I've read this comic about 4 times now, and I can honestly say it is easily the most thought-provoking Batman comic I have ever read. Now don't get me wrong, Night Cries is disturbing. In fact, there's a moment in this comic that I think is the single darkest moment in any Batman comic. The only other thing I can think of that maybe even comes close is Barbara Gordon's assault in The Killing Joke. I'm not gonna lie, at times, Night Cries can be a very hard read, but it is so worth it. In a lot of ways, it's the perfect Batman story. There's an intriguing mystery, and we get to see the pieces slowly come together. Commissioner Gordon also gets a really good subplot here with his son and his wife. And Gordon here seems a lot more human than he does in a lot of other comics. He has his faults, and we see these faults affect his family and ultimately make him a more interesting character because of it. But the great thing about Night Cries is that it analyzes Batman himself and looks into the hypocrisy of his character within the subject matter of fear, abuse, and violence. Like I said, it's very thought-provoking. The comic really makes you think. The only downside or gripe I have with this comic is that it can be a bit on the nose when talking about child abuse, but really that's just a handful of moments. Other than that, the writing is fantastic. As I said, Night Cries was written by Archie Goodwin. Archie Goodwin was an American comic book artist, editor, and writer. Night Cries was not Goodwin's first time writing a Batman comic. In fact, Goodwin had been writing for The Dark Knight for nearly 20 years by the time Night Cries was released in 1992. Goodwin also made major writing contributions to the horror anthology series Creepy and Eerie, as well as some of the early Star Wars comics. Goodwin wrote quite a bit throughout his career, but primarily he was known for his work as an editor. In fact, he's known as the gold standard when it comes to what a good comic book editor should be. There are tons of interviews and articles with a lot of big names in the comic industry who all say Goodwin was the best editor they ever worked with. It seems like no one had a single bad word to say about him. Goodwin had a very long and successful career in the comic industry. I would argue that Night Cries is Goodwin's magnum opus. It was also his last major project before his death in 1998. Night Cries was illustrated by Scott Hampton. Scott Hampton is an American writer and illustrator who has had a long-standing career working with DC, Marvel, and Image. As an illustrator, Hampton worked on the Dark Knight Dynasty, Legends of the Dark Knight, Lucifer, and of course, Night Cries. I loved Hampton's work in this comic. He's known for combining traditional watercolor paintings with sequential art. Hampton went for a more realistic approach rather than something that might be more stylistically appealing. Because of this, Night Cries feels more grounded and gritty. I also really love Batman's design here. He's a nice mix between Robert Pattinson's Batsuit and his Silver Age suit. Now would be the time when I talk about the development of Batman Night Cries, but to be honest, there really isn't much information out there. It's really a shame, because I would love to know how this comic came together, being that such a unique project. I don't know what Archie Goodwin's motivation for writing this comic was. I don't know if this was a personal story for him or not, but it's clear that Archie felt it was important to get this story out there.
I'm also writing a Batman graphic novel with Scott Hampton, who's a terrific young painter, and this will be a fairly serious mystery that also deals with child abuse, and that'll be out sometime next year. So all that is keeping me off the street.
Whether Night Cries was a personal story or not, it doesn't really matter, because either way, Archie was able to create a beautiful graphic novel that addresses a very serious issue. So, with all that said, let's finally get into Batman Night Cries. But first, a word from our sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by FlexiSpot. I've been in the market for a nice standing desk for a while now, and thanks to FlexiSpot, I now have this beauty right here. Standing desks are amazing. Not only are they proven to help improve your posture and productivity, but it's just so freeing to not have to feel so confined to sitting in a chair all day. And to stand desk up, all it takes is a single button, and you can adjust it to any height you desire. It makes for the perfect workstation, study spot, or gaming area. And whenever you want to sit down again, lowering the desk is just as easy as raising it. And voila, you have a beautiful sitting desk again. I absolutely love this desk. It comes with a handy drawer right in the front where you can store all your work essentials. But I think my favorite thing about this desk is that you can charge all your devices, like your phone or tablets, right into the front of the desk itself. You'd think building a desk like this would be a long and tedious endeavor, but it's actually not. Just 3 easy steps and that's it. You can easily do it in under 5 minutes. With the holidays coming up, a good desk like the one I just showed you would make for a great gift for friends and family. If you're not necessarily in the market for a desk, then I'd recommend checking out some more of the awesome products that FlexiSpot offers, like their office chairs, recliners, and even adjustable beds. If you'd like to get a desk for yourself or loved one this holiday, then please check out the link below, and I would like to once again thank FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video. The comic begins with an excerpt from a wildlife guidebook. Bats are nocturnal. They rely on highly developed hearing using echolocation, sonar, to avoid collision and capture prey. They emit high-pitched cries, up to 50,000 Hz as many as 200 per second, that echo from any object encountered, providing information about its size and distance. Blinded bats move easily through complex obstacles, but deafness leaves them helpless, unable to find their way. I want you to remember this passage, because its significance is going to make a lot more sense as the story progresses, especially the last part about the deaf bats. Bruce wakes up suddenly in the night after hearing these loud cries in his sleep. He even hears the cries when he wakes up. The cries pierce his sleep, driving him awake. Even rising, there's no shutting them out. It is time. Time to don the mask, the equipment. Time to hunt in a city full of prey. One of the running themes in Night Cries is trauma, or more accurately, how we deal with trauma. Bruce wasn't abused per se, but he did experience something very traumatic when he was young, something that paved the road for the rest of his life. He might not have been abused, but he can relate to the pain and the sadness. Something very common for someone who was abused or experienced violence from a young age is to continue that violence when they are grown. A lot of adults who abuse their kids or are abusive to their spouses or whoever were likely abused when they were young. Some people may not agree, but that's what Bruce does. Dressing up as the Batman, beating up people who don't align with his idea of morality, it's really just an excuse to continue that violence. If you read this panel again, it sounds like the only way Bruce is able to silence these cries is by continuing the cycle of violence. Now, Bruce can say what he's doing is for justice, or to ensure no child goes through the pain he did. And yes, that's partly true. But it's also true that hurt people hurt. And I think it's undeniable that deep down, a tiny bit of Bruce enjoys the pain he causes. Next, we see the newly elected Commissioner Jim Gordon is having a hard time adjusting to his new responsibilities. Jim hears a homicide case being called in from the Heights on the police radio. Despite his commissioner duties, he decides to investigate the murder himself. He gets chastised by the mayor's assistant Latham for still acting like a street cop when he has higher priorities now. But Jim doesn't care. A family died, and he intends on finding out why. Jim gets the rundown from a cop outside and goes in to investigate the brutal scene. A father, mother, and little boy have been brutally murdered. They were scalded with boiling water and beaten to death. The father was drowned in a tub of bloody boiling water. The water is still steaming, so the murders took place only recently. The police could have just missed the killer. Scalded, beaten to death. Father, mother, child. Why is it, Commissioner? What, Sergeant? On the really bad ones, the medical examiner's always late. Outside the crime scene, Gordon sees a mother slapping her own child across the face after he failed to get her cigarettes. After he's scolded for ignoring his commissioner duties again by Latham, Gordon's wife, Barbara, calls him because he hasn't been home in a long time. He comes out of the darkness, eyes glittering, threatening, like the gun he holds. Perhaps robbery is his only intention, but when he is done, my mother and father are dead, and a void opens that I will devote my life attempting to fill. A task terrible, elusive, despite the extremes which I'm willing to go. Bruce is remembering the night his parents died, a memory that likely replays in his head again and again. Bruce might not have been abused, like I said, but he knows childhood trauma very well. The Night Cries seem to be a painstaking reminder that trauma is not going anywhere. Batman crashes through the sky roof of a drug house. He fights all the guards and cooks while he talks about the void in his soul caused by his parents' death. He fills that void by stalking criminals at night. I already talked about this in the beginning, but really this panel just helps support my point. When Bruce's parents were gunned down, there was a huge void in his soul. The only way he can fill that void is by continuing the cycle of violence. When someone deals with abuse from their parents, they can also feel this void in their soul, not by the death of their parents, but by the betrayal. When you're a child, your parents are supposed to be your protectors. There's a natural trust there, so when our parents hurt us, abuse us, that trust is broken. That's when the sadness and the trauma come in. That's a trust that for some people can never be fixed. Bruce is investigating a new drug rampaging through the streets of Gotham called Boost. They call it Boost. Mixed with cocaine in factories like this, it produces a faster, more violent high than crack. And because it can be sold in smaller quantities at cheaper prices, no one's concerned that it also produces more ODs, a new plague in the making. One of the dealers tries to escape from Batman through the air ducts. Someone clearly didn't play Arkham Asylum. Regardless, once he reaches the other end, he runs right into the Dark Knight. Off me, you crazy. No, that's for in front of your crew. No one to impress here. It's why I let you run. We're alone now. I came to the Heights for a name. One I need to learn others. You're going to provide it, Coley. Next we see Bruce for an event he sponsored to raise money for the victims of child abuse. Here we meet Brian and Sybil McLean. The McLeans are siblings who run this organization to help the children. Brian notices Bruce's bloody knuckles. He says that he banged it into a wall. It's challenging enough for the average person to strive for a balanced life. Bruce finds it nearly impossible to lead two lives. One as a vigilante who goes out every night and hunts criminals, and the other as a full-time CEO of one of the biggest companies on Earth. Undoubtedly, there's going to be times when his two lives clash with each other. He can't hide every bruise or every black eye all the time. Thanks to the donations from the Wayne Foundation, the two are going to open a center in Gotham City designed to help as many kids as possible. With the center open and active, we're still only confronting part of the problem. My staff and I are treating the children after the damage. With time, with care, we can have success if they reach us. God knows so many don't. Abusers usually were abused themselves, Wayne. With the proper therapy programs and counseling in place, they can be helped. The pattern can be broken before the child is. Brian asks Bruce to take a bigger role in the project. He knows the trauma Bruce suffered as a boy and hopes Bruce can sympathize with the kids that he and Sybil are trying to help. Bruce tells him he has found his own way of dealing with this trauma. Brian introduces Bruce to the center's physical therapist, Josh Adams, an army vet who had some hard times after his service. Brian helped turn his life around, and now he works helping the McLeans with the kids. He patches Bruce's bloody knuckles up. Bruce tells Brian that if he really wants his help, he should ask the new police commissioner, Jim Gordon. Since becoming commissioner, Gordon's department has taken on a multitude of abuse cases. Speaking of Commissioner Gordon, he has a flashback to the abuse he faced from his father's hands as he takes his leather belt out of the closet. Throughout the story so far, we've seen little snippets from Gordon's past, little memories of the physical abuse he faced from his father. No sympathy from me, Jimmy. You know the rules. You know the punishment. You steal. You lie. You pay. You hear me, Jimmy? Jimmy. Gordon's wife, Barbara, is trying to snap him out of his trance. Barbara tells Gordon that he needs some much-needed rest. She makes the mistake of calling Gordon Jimmy, which he hates. That's the name his father used. Barbara's upset that Jim works so much. He's barely home anymore. She questions what Gordon does when he's not home, being that he was unfaithful to her a few years ago. This starts a huge argument between the two. We learn that they tried marriage counseling at one point, but Gordon stopped coming to the meetings when work got busy. James Jr. hears the argument from the other rooms and gets his father's gun. Luckily, the gun wasn't cocked. Jimmy said he heard a Batman yelling at his mommy, that bad man being Gordon. James Gordon Jr. is a really fascinating character who doesn't nearly get enough recognition. James Jr. first made his debut in Frank Miller's Batman Year One, where he's only a baby. In some comics, James Jr. is a minor character, but in other comics, like Black Mirror, he's a sick and sadistic serial killer. Being a one-off comic, Night Cries isn't officially a part of any continuity, although it does go out of its way to reference some events from Batman Year One. In some ways, it can be seen as a spiritual sequel to Year One, other than the actual sequels to Year One. It's actually theorized that James Jr. suffered head trauma at the end of Year One when he was thrown off the bridge by the hitman, and this is what causes psychotic tendencies. Even at a young age, James Jr. showed many signs that he had issues, like torturing small animals and possibly poisoning some of his classmates. I think this moment in Night Cries can hint at his psychotic tendencies as well. Given that the cycle of abuse is one of the driving themes in Night Cries, it's not far-fetched to see how the trauma in James Jr.'s life could have snowballed and led to his sadistic side later in life. Gordon leaves the apartment and goes to investigate another murder case. The person committing these brutal crimes does not pick his targets randomly. He finds his targets and plans his crimes for a long time before acting. He's smart enough to know how to cover his crimes. He's smart enough to feed poisoned meat to the family's guard dogs to get them out of the way, and he knew how to short-circuit the alarm system long enough to commit his crimes. Once inside, the police see a pretty grisly sight. The wife is hanging from the ceiling with a wired phone wrapped around her neck. The husband has been stripped naked, and his head was smashed through an old box TV. There's blood everywhere. It's clear that the killer isn't here after money or a quick thrill. He takes his sweet time with each and every person he kills. He tortures them before killing them in a very brutal way. The police find cigarette burns on the man's buttocks and genitals. The man's name was Anthony Rizzoli, and he was a big-time campaign contributor to the mayor. These murders are undoubtedly connected to the murders in the Heights. Unlike the Heights, however, there's a witness here, Rizzoli's niece, Catherine. Unfortunately for police, Catherine hasn't spoken in over a year. She's been to multiple specialists, but nothing so far. Catherine sees something outside of her window that frightened her. Gordon goes to look, but sees nothing. He decides to go out into the woods and investigate further. Sorry, the trouble with an appearance that can strike fear in the minds of criminals is that sometimes it strikes fear in the innocents as well. Gordon asks Batman what he's doing here. He says he's been following a chain. Anthony Rizzoli was the final link. He was the one importing booze into the city disguised as perfume bottles. Gordon brings the news to Latham, who tells him to bury it, as Rizzoli was friends with the mayor and it would look badly on him. Latham tells him that if he brings it up again, he'd be committing career suicide. Gordon is clearly not happy about this. Jim meets Batman back on the roof. Gordon's having trouble connecting the two murders together. The only thing the families had in common is the way they were killed and the boost. Both the first family and the drug house were in the Heights. The dealers would use locals for street sales. It's likely the family would have been involved somehow. This could have been by a rival gang. Batman tells Gordon to work on the connections while he finds the rivals. That night, Bruce wakes up again hearing the cries. The sheet, like sleep itself, is no protection. The cries come again. He cannot stop hearing them. They cannot be shut out. Another night waits, this time free of falling snow. A perfect night. A hunter's night. The mask and the equipment are close at hand. The cries piercingly strong, shatteringly clear. And he knows what must be done to bring the silence once more. New prey, established method, a chain, the links, night after night, without exception. Here, we see the cries come back stronger every night. When we have trauma and we try to repress it like Bruce does here, it only comes back stronger. Trauma like that isn't something that can be forgotten. Another murder has been committed. This time, the victim was sodomized with a wine bottle. And another witness, Dustin. Unlike Catherine, Dustin can speak, and he says that the Batman killed his father. Daddy showed me him on the TV, always all black and scary. How he comes after bad people who don't keep secrets. Only I never told anybody, and he still came. Dustin's father told him that the Batman would come after him if he told him their secret. That secret being a game Dustin and his father would play. The game was called Boy and Girl, where Daddy plays the boy and Dustin will play the girl. There is a certain irony here, that Dustin's father used Batman as a fear tactic, so Dustin wouldn't tell anyone what his father was doing to him. This actually brings us back to what Bruce told Gordon in the woods earlier, about striking fear in the innocents. The irony being that Dustin's father and Batman both use fear as a means to get what they want. Abuse, whether it's physical, mental, or sexual, is essentially about fear. You abuse someone to make them fearful of you. When someone's weaker than you and is afraid of you, it's a lot easier to manipulate and control them. That's what abuse is really about. And this is exactly what Batman does. Now, am I saying Batman is a predator? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. I thought that was pretty clear with the Wildlife Guidebook in the beginning. Obviously, the circumstances are different, but the main point still stands. Batman is, by definition, a predator. Gordon wakes up from a nightmare. In it, his father was beating him. It seems Bruce isn't the only one who hears the night cries while he sleeps. Blame yourself, Jimmy. You break the rules, you have to pay. A marriage you can't save, a job you can't handle, a case you can't solve. It never ends, Jimmy. Fooling yourself, failing. Since you were a kid, this is the only way to set things straight. It seems that Dustin's abuse has brought back some rough memories for Gordon. It may not have been the same type of abuse. I think Gordon's was only physical, not sexual. But hearing about any person going through any type of abuse can bring back your own trauma. When James Jr. interrupts Gordon while he goes over the case files, he snaps and almost hits him. Luckily, he comes to his senses and hugs him instead, and he promises that he'll get the help he needs. This is how you end the cycle. Not becoming a symbol of fear and hurting others, but by admitting that you were hurt by someone, and taking the steps necessary to get the help you need, and not to become an abuser yourself. Gordon's instinct was to go to violence because that's what he was taught. It's a lot easier than you think to give in to those instincts, but it's a lot harder to realize that you were taught the wrong things and try to relearn them, as to not make the same mistakes that you were taught. Gordon and Batman meet again. It turns out Anthony Rizzoli was found to have a collection of illegal videotapes, and the autopsy reports from the first murder shows that the boy was dead before the parents were killed. Traces of his blood were found on the father's knuckles. Scar tissue was found all throughout his body, showing that he had been scalded. The two start putting the puzzle pieces together. Rizzoli had a collection of sick and twisted videotapes, and his head was smashed with a TV set, likely the same TV he'd watched these tapes on. Catherine had been severely traumatized and had been mute for a year, suggesting that the girl had suffered horrible abuse. Catherine's mother knew of the abuse she suffered from the father's hands, but never reported it, so she was hung with a cord from a telephone. These murders aren't about drugs. Someone is killing the parents in the way they abuse their kids, and the only suspect we have so far is Batman himself. It is impossible, as Batman was tracking down a drug dealer named Hawker when Dustin's father was killed. Gordon and Batman take Dustin to the McClanes to help him. They want to figure out why Dustin said it was Batman who killed his father. Brian says the perpetrator is likely someone dressed in all black, or someone even disguised as Batman. Despite all his therapy sessions, Dustin still insists it was Batman. Gordon thanks Brian and asks him to keep the details of the case to himself. Later, Gordon and Batman meet again. Batman did not kill Dustin's father, but he can't help but draw some comparisons between him and the killer. I said you had a serial killer. The pattern is there, like the others. The way Dustin's father died parallels the boy's abuse. Something more is at work here. To put on a mask, to use the darkness, to deliver a frightening justice. Does that sound like a serial killer, Jim? Or like we've done all we can tonight, and we'll deal with it better tomorrow. Bruce didn't finish his thought, but he was probably going to say it sounds like what he does, which really just goes back to what I was saying earlier, about Batman being a predator. To his credit, it seems like he's starting to make that connection himself. Next, we see Bruce go out patrolling the streets for another night, contemplating the recent cases of child abuse, the lights of the city, and behind some of them, from the poorest tenement to the most elegant apartment tower, terrible crimes are being perpetrated. Crimes against children by the very people who should comfort and protect them. Crimes all my training, all my methods might normally never uncover, but somehow he knows. Something draws him to the horror, calls him through the darkness, drives him over the edge. How close is it to what drives me? With nowhere left to turn, Batman decides to visit Catherine. He doesn't want to scare the girl, so Bruce does something he almost never does and takes his mask off for her. He tells her that he understands why she doesn't want to talk. He tells her that it wasn't her fault. Bruce knows Catherine isn't going to talk to her, but maybe she doesn't need to. He asks her to draw what she remembers. As Catherine draws, Bruce sits down on the bed next to her and gives her a teddy bear. Catherine finally shows Bruce her drawing. It's a bat. Actually, it's a tattoo, one Bruce has seen before. Winter daylight comes thinly, dies swiftly, crowded by the approach of another winter night. The pace of the city gradually slows, the din of its streets steadily fades, and finally, inevitably, the cries can be heard. After his job at the center is done, Josh Adams, the McClane's physical therapist, gets changed in the locker room. We can see he has a bat tattoo, the same tattoo Catherine drew on his wrist. He also grabs a gun out of his locker. It seems that Josh Adams is the murderer. He leaves the center and starts running, like something's chasing him. He gets to the roof where he, unfortunately, runs into Batman. Bruce remembered that Brian McClane told him Josh Adams was in the service. Bruce did some digging and found out that Adams was in an elite unit called the Vampires. All the members share this bat tattoo. Batman demands to know what's happening. Adams tells him about a mission the Vampires went on in Central America. The Vampires were ambush fighters. They were sent to clean out rebel strongholds. They were supposed to protect the locals and only fight off the enemies. But at first, they didn't know who the locals were and who were the rebels. So there was a lot of trial and error. Many innocents died, some of them being children. Brian McClane was one of the vampires. When Josh started hearing the Night Cries, Brian helped treat him and got him through the service. He helped recuperate all the vampires, but there was no one to help Brian. Seeing all the innocent villagers die, all of the children, it broke him. He started hearing the cries too. He still hears them. Not like we did. Dreams, memories, something you can talk through, work out. For Doc, some kind of circuit opened, left him in their wavelength, in tune to the kids, their pain, not just back in those villages, here, now. It's like a form of extrasensory perception, like sonar, specifically tuned to children's pain. Adams started noticing Brian was acting strange. After hearing about the murders and after all the details, he started getting suspicious. And after he saw Brian scouting out a house where Dustin lived, Josh knew Brian was the murderer. The building they're standing on is the next place Brian's been scouting. Josh was going to try and talk to Brian, try and help him like he helped him in the service. Suddenly, Batman hears someone screaming. It must be Brian. Batman's able to find the screaming and crash through the window before Brian can kill an abusive father he's been tracking. The two scramble on the ground. Batman's able to get the upper hand, but in all the confusion, the father hits Batman with a stick. Bruce is able to push him away. He was going to hurt him more, but stops when he sees the poor little girl staring at him with tears rolling down her face. It's a chain. A damn chain, and it's gotta be broken. You're hurting them because someone hurt you. For God's sakes, break the chain. It can't keep going on and on. Parent to child to... He hears something coming from the hallway. While Batman was dealing with the father, Brian McClane snuck out and ran into Josh Adams in the hall. Josh tried to stop him, but Brian got away. He also has Brian's gun. In the beginning, Bruce was feeding into the chain of violence to silence the screams and to fill the void, continuing the pain. But after the murders, after Catherine and Dustin, something switched. He saw the parallels. He saw his own hypocrisy. He was a predator, in ways still is, but he's going to make an effort to change that. First, with Catherine, when he took off his mask, and the second is right here. He knew that if he were to beat the girl's father in front of her, despite the fact the father was abusive to the girl, it wasn't the right answer. It would only traumatize her more, leading to more sadness and anger, and maybe led to more abuse and hurt. That's what Bruce means when he talks about the chain, a never-ending link, one after the other. He needed to break the chain to end the cycle. Really, that's the only way to end abuse. Batman goes back to the McClane Center where he meets Sybil outside. She says Brian ran past her while holding some kind of bundle. Sybil tells Batman that Brian sometimes goes to the center playroom when he needs a moment alone. Batman goes to investigate while he tells Sybil to call Commissioner Gordon. When inside, Batman walks to the playroom and Brian already has his gun on him. He tells Batman to stop moving. Brian has a bat painted on his face. This is what Catherine saw. McClane, you're not the only one involved here. That's right. I wanted you to stop me. You or the police. But the cries, so many, so damn many, they won't stop. And no matter what I want, they have to be answered. The bundle Sybil saw Brian carrying is a baby. He got from the last house before he ran. Brian tells Batman about his father, about his and Sybil's childhoods. As a young boy, while laying in bed at night, Brian would hear his father abusing Sybil. It's implied the abuse was sexual. Brian's father never abused him, but night after night, he would hear Sybil go through hell. He would hear her cries. When Brian got older and joined the vampires, the cries got louder. By the time they opened the center in Gotham City, they were deafening. But these cries were different. Brian was able to signal these cries out and know where they were coming from. He felt the child's pain. He saw it, and he lived through them. Almost like a superpower. Each murder, each house, was a cry. The cry from this house was an infant in their crib. The same baby Brian's holding now, although he was too late. By the time he got there, the baby was already dead. She was dying when I got there, just before you burst in, dead before I made it to the street. And by the time I reached here, the cries were coming again. More of them, more. This country has over 2 million cases of child abuse every year, more than 2,000 deaths. Too many cries. I can't go on listening. Someone else has to hear them. Brian puts Josh's gun to his head. Batman tries to stop him, but he's too late. Next, we see Gordon and his family at the airport. Barbara and James Jr. are leaving the city while Gordon will go to therapy to help with his trauma and anger. He hugs James one last time and watches the plane takes off. Throughout the comic, we have seen how each character has responded to their trauma, either by trying to break the cycle, actually breaking it, or feeding into it. For Sybil, she took her pain and used it as fuel for her career. She dedicates her life to helping abused children. Josh Adams directly caused the death of innocents, and thus feels he has to pay for his sins by helping the McClanes in their mission. Brian started out with good intentions, helping Sybil with the clinic, but his demons, the Cries, eventually got to him. They broke him, and his solution was to act as an avenger and kill the abusers. At first, Bruce was feeding into the violence to quell his demons, but after he realized him and the killer had more than a few things in common, he decided he was going to try and break the chain. He tried, but ultimately he's going to keep wearing the suit and being vigilante. He's going to keep feeding to the violence no matter what. But he did make an effort. Gordon is the only one who legitimately tries and breaks the chain. He stopped before abusing Jimmy Jr. and promised to get the help he needed, even if that means losing his family for a while, because sometimes those sacrifices are needed. Whether or not Gordon was successful or not in breaking the cycle really just depends on which continuity you follow with James Jr. But if in this world, James Jr. doesn't become the sadistic serial killer he does in Black Mirror, then Gordon is the only one who was really successful in actually ending the cycle. Next, we see the same passage from the Wildlife Guide from earlier, about how bats use sonar and about the deaf bats. 2 million cases, 2 million deaths, too many cries. Someone else has to hear them. In the night, he listens, and only the sound of his own voice comes to him, screaming in frustration, the cry of a lone bat, unable to find its way. Earlier, I said the cries were a metaphor for trauma. I still think that's true, but here, the cries take on a more literal sense. The night cries are all the children suffering from abuse. Batman can't hear them all, like Brian could. And if he could hear them all, he'd likely just go mad, just like Brian did. This is what the passage from the Wildlife Guidebook was about, the deaf bats. So what does it mean? Well, we can't stop abuse. It's just not possible. But we can be there for the person after they're abused. We can help them, be there for them, give them proper treatment. We can teach them not to be abusers. We can stop the cycle. We might not be able to stop abuse outright, but we can greatly reduce it by helping the abused so they don't become the abusers. And if you are someone who has experienced abuse, it's up to you to get the help you need. It's up to you not to fall into the cycle. And that's what Night Cries is all about, escaping the cycle of abuse. Night Cries really is one of the most incredible comics I think I've ever read, yet it is quite disturbing, possibly the most disturbing Batman comic of all time. It's at the very least a very strong competitor. But unlike the other comics, the horror in Night Cries comes from a very real place and a very tragic one. It's no wonder so many people recommended I check out Night Cries after my Arkham Asylum video. Unfortunately, I feel that the comic's infamy overshadows its content. Night Cries is a masterpiece. The writing, the symbolism, and the themes are some of the best I've seen in any Batman comic. Hell, it's some of the best I've seen in any comic, period. As much as I love this comic, and I will scream its praise to anyone who will listen, I can't really relate to it. I've had my fair share of hardships in life. I've dealt with major bouts of depression, and my physical health has failed me multiple times, but the one saving grace I've had through all of it was that I always had a loving, supportive family. I've never been abused, by them or by anyone. I know how lucky I am to say that. I really am. So on that level, I can never relate to Night Cries. While I was doing research for this video, I found a great channel by the name of Siike Donnelly, who also made a video on Night Cries. Siike is someone I do believe has had personal experience with abuse, so I think Night Cries was just able to resonate with him a little more than with me. I found some of his words on Night Cries to be very profound, and honestly, his video was one of the main reasons I wanted to make a video of my own on Night Cries. I actually reached out to Siike and asked him if I could include some of the things he said in my video, and he graciously said yes. So I want to give a big thank you to Siike Donnelly. He didn't have to say yes, but he did, and for that I am grateful.
This book it's hard to get through, but it is really good. It's a really good Batman comic. It's hard to face the things that the characters go through in this book. It's hard to know that there are people out there that hurt in this way, and that people still go through stuff like this. It's awful. I don't see a lot of people out there talking about this book, and I know there are people out there that hurt, and probably in ways like this, and it's awful. So all I can say is that if you are hurting, you should talk to somebody that you trust. Not, it's hard to say this. You don't know you're being hurt sometimes. So if you think you might be being hurt, talk to somebody that isn't the person that you think is hurting you. The message of this book about breaking the chain, about getting off your hamster wheel, about not repeating the sins that were done to you, it's a powerful message. It's one that everybody needs to know, because at some point in everyone's life they go through something really tough. Maybe not this tough, maybe not this intense, but there are people out there that do.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Again, I want to give a huge shout out to Siike for allowing me to use clips from his video. Thank you, man. And please do me a favor. I'm going to link his channel down below. If you made it this far into my video, please stop by Siike Donnelly's channel and show him some love. He really deserves it. And that's going to be about it. If you like what you saw here today, please subscribe, because there's going to be a lot more coming later. If you've been watching my channel and you saw the last video on Berserk, I know a lot of people have been waiting for the next part. That's going to be next after this one. So if you've waited this long for the next part of Berserk, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm going to link all my other socials down below: Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, etc. I've recently started a second channel called Into the Depths Live, where I will be going live from now on. So I will also link that down below. If you haven't yet, go subscribe there. I stream every Friday and Saturday, and they're a lot of fun. So yeah, please consider stopping by. I want to give a very special thanks to my amazing patrons: Trotton King, Kieran Dow, Seth, Carscale Golden, Tyler Kruzik, Degent Slut, Anthony Ferrara, Karen Ferrara, Alexandra Gospudin, Smokin' Void, and Sidio Troy. And yeah, that's going to be it. Please let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought of Night Cries, if you've read it, how it affected you. And if you have any more suggestions for me to check out, like this one was, then please let me know. And yeah, that's pretty much it. See ya.